Hello my fellow weebs and welcome back to the One Piece Saga, the series where I undergo the insane journey of watching through One Piece for the very first time, giving my thoughts on it and ranking each arc in a tier list to determine which is unquestionably, definitively and definitely not just in my opinion, the best one. As per usual, if this is your first time joining us, I'd recommend going back to the first video to hear all the rules and technicalities, but with that out of the way, we've still got a few more things to talk about before we delve into the arcs themselves. We are jumping into a new saga today, Alabasta, which is a first for this series, so we have a few changes to talk about. But before we get to those, I really want to talk about the name of this saga. You may have noticed that I said Alabasta, not Alabasta as it is written everywhere, and in this case, that is not me misspeaking as I often do. You see, when I write these videos, I want to get a clear distinction between the arcs, so I use the One Piece wiki to determine where each one ends and begins, and this is where my confusion began, as the saga is called Alabasta. The subtitles say Alabasta, and every single YouTube video also says Alabasta. So okay, I thought, I'll just go straight to the source, the Japanese version, right? I mean, they say Alabasta in the show, and here the kana is Ra, so it is supposed to be Alabasta. Though thing is, Japanese R's and L's don't really work as they do in English, so I guess it just got changed to Alabasta somewhere along the way. Either way, I was very confused for a good while. But just to keep things simple, as I see most people do it, I'll use Alabasta going forward. So if I see a comment about that, I don't know, I guess I'll just be mildly annoyed. Not much else. Jokes aside, it's time to get serious and look at where the tier list sits right now. Coming off of the East Blue Saga, we have two arcs in the S tier and the recently covered Log Town in A tier. And now that we're moving into an entirely new saga, I thought it might be a good idea to distinguish between them to see whether some sagas rank higher than others. So every arc from Alabasta will have an orange/yellow tint instead of the blue we've had so far. But with that being said, let's not waste any more time and delve straight into the first arc of Alabasta, Reverse Mountain. And today we're starting off with a very brief arc consisting of a mere 2 episodes. Though with that being said, I couldn't help but notice the difference in pacing right away compared to the filler Worship Island arc we covered last time. But we'll have plenty of time to talk about that later, so let's not dwell on this for too long. The arc opens with the entire crew buzzing about entering the Grand Line, and I feel like this was very much intended to parallel the viewer as well, as I felt exactly the same as the characters in the show. We had been building up to this point for 62 episodes. We had heard many stories of the mythical Grand Line, and finally, we are here. It almost felt surreal. Though before they even descend the mountain, they already face their first challenge, a massive whale blocking their path. Though before we get any further, I want to throw a question out there to you fine folks. I'm afraid of stumbling onto some spoilers by searching for this myself, but has something about the animation changed at this point? I'll bring up a few more examples of this later, but from this point, there are certain shots that I don't think we've really seen done before. For instance, we get this dolly zoom type shot with Nami when they're nearing the whale. Again, I'll mention a few more examples where I found myself thinking about this later, but if you could drop a comment about that, I'd really appreciate it. As we've gotten quite used to by now, Luffy pulls a Luffy by first firing the cannon at the whale and then punching it in the eye, which, needless to say, doesn't make it too happy, and thus the entire ship is swallowed whole. Luffy, however, is still on top of the whale, which is now going back underwater, which of course means the end for Luffy. And now we get to the bizarre part. We cut back to the rest of the crew, which have ended up in a lake of sorts with a small island which has a house on it. By this point, with the latch we just saw, I was fairly certain that we are actually in some sort of submarine rather than a live whale. I think my notes sum up my state of mind fairly well here. What even is this? I guess this is what to expect in the Grand Line. Jokes aside, I do think having some sort of bizarre event happen straight away when entering the Grand Line was very much intentional, as it does set expectations for everything moving forward. And in case this whole thing wasn't weird enough, a massive squid appears before the ship, but once again subverting all expectations is immediately shot down by a single old dude. Even though this whole thing had me desperately trying to make some sort of sense out of this, I couldn't help but immediately think that this guy had to be much more powerful than he was letting on. I mean, he just blasted this massive king squid in a mere few seconds. He honestly gave me those Uncle Iroh vibes, a chill dude without a care in the world, who in reality is likely more powerful than a majority of people in the Grand Line. But again, I feel like every single one of these events are purposely written to be as bizarre as possible. We had been told many times that the Grand Line is a dangerous place from which people don't return, but now we are actually being shown why. The other pirates are not even the issue, it is the downright bizarre things that happen here, which we will get to more a little bit later. As for the old man, we find out his name is Korotos, and we get this absolutely brilliant exchange between him and the Straw Hats. Usopp threatens him with cannons, which is followed by these dramatic snaps between the camera angles. We then stop on Korotos' eye, who says, "You'd better not, or someone will die." Obviously hinting at the potential danger for our Straw Hats, especially with what they just saw themselves with the King Squid. Sanji, stepping up to the challenge, asks just who is he saying will die, and without skipping a beat, Korotos just answers, "Me." This one caught me really off guard and I got a good laugh out of it. The whole juxtaposition between this dude one-shotting a monster and then just chilling with a newspaper is just brilliant. And then there's even this fourth wall break as the snapping shots continue a few more times, with Korotos himself asking, haven't they heard of a running gag? Again, chef's kiss. We are then told that this is indeed a whale by the name of Laboon, and the scars on its head, or nose? Well, whatever it is, it's from bashing into the Red Line. Despite the Straw Hats initially doubting him, we find out that Korotos is actually caring for the whale by giving him pain relievers, and at this point, I was starting to think that One Piece was about to once again blast me in the feels with this whole animal business. As for Luffy, he has also found his way inside the whale and he's wandering the halls, only for him to run into two new characters, Miss Wednesday and Mr. Nine, who are trying to hunt the whale down, thus also trying to get rid of Korotos. And just like that, we get another animal story. Why, One Piece? Why? We learn that he has been slamming his head into the Red Line for 50 years because he is wishing for a certain group of pirates to come down the reverse mountain again. His devotion is so strong that he wants to knock the mountain down and find them himself. Once again, I feel like my notes will give you a pretty good insight into what I was thinking. No, not another tragic animal story, man. Why, man? He's waiting for a ship to arrive back down the mountain. If you watched the last video in the series, you'll know that I am an animal lover, so seeing one being hurt in any form of media will already pull at my feels. Thing is, this whole waiting at the door thing is exactly what my cat does. Every single time I go out, I return to him having brought all of his toys by the door. So this whole thing slapped me in the feels super hard. Though moving past that, I have to turn my theory mind on for a second. 50 long years, you say? Could this crew have been Gold Roger? We would later see a flashback and Korotos would tell a story of the pirates. But what if this is the case of the unreliable narrator? What if this was Gold Roger, but Korotos lied to protect Laboon? They never left him. He was captured and executed. Obviously, I don't know how big of a role Korotos or Laboon would play later, but this little tale was very interesting. Luffy being Luffy once again comes up with an interesting way to solve the problem. He promises Laboon to be his rival forever, in other words, giving him a new purpose. He then paints the Straw Hat symbol on him and tells him to avoid hitting his head to not rub it off. So at least that was pretty wholesome. But following this, we get a lore dump about what to expect from the Grand Line. First and foremost, we are introduced to the log pose, which would also become a bit of a gag going forward, with some characters constantly smashing them only to acquire a new one and then breaking that one as well. But these log poses are the only way to traverse the Grand Line properly, as traditional compasses do not work here. We also learned that what you'd call common sense is essentially pointless in the Grand Line. Things like weather are absolutely random. It can snow one moment and be blazing hot the next. Though on the note of log poses, we find out that they work by pointing island to island, meaning that no matter which way you begin, you will have to go between numerous islands if you wish to traverse the Grand Line. And what I found very interesting was that we are immediately teased of what lies at the end. A mysterious island, Raftel, only confirmed to exist by a single person, Gold Roger. My first thought was of course that this must be where the One Piece is. However, if you've been tagging along for this series, you'll know that I'm still not entirely sold on the idea that the One Piece even exists. But that might be tinfoil Korotos speaking again, so who knows. If you want me to go a little bit more into why I still believe that, just let me know and I'll do that in the next video. Either way, this Raftel Island has to be massive in terms of importance, and I can't wait to see more of what the Grand Line has to offer, especially in terms of these little lore bits being dropped. As you have noticed, I absolutely love trying to dig into these little clues and try to predict what we might see next. Finally, Mr. 9 and Miss Wednesday reappear once again, asking the Straw Hats if they could take them to Whisky Peak. And thus, we say goodbye to Crocus and Laboon and set sail toward the next island. Though we get one final scene that really made me a lot more confident in my theory that the pirates who befriended Laboon were Gold Roger's crew. As we see the Straw Hats sail off, Crocus has this short monologue about how these pirates might have been the ones they've been waiting for all this time, ending with, "Don't you think, Roger?" Again, obviously do not spoil it for me, but I'm fairly certain that this is indeed the case. And that's Reverse Mountain. A very short but both event and lore-packed arc for sure, with our first proper look at the chaotic nature of the Grand Line, the introduction of log poses, and our first hint of what lies at the end, a mysterious island Raftel. I really enjoyed this one, despite it blasting my feels again, though as it is so short, it is fairly tricky in terms of rankings. Though with that being said, I'd put it as the highest B tier, pushing romance down to second in B tier. Primarily because of the amount of lore we got in this one, which made me very excited to see what would happen next. I would have thought about ranking it even higher, but I don't think that's entirely fair since it is only 2 episodes. So it didn't really have any room to drag, hence a high B. Next stop, Whisky Peak. First things first, it's once again time to give you a bit of an insight into my notes, which simply say snow and then Pog with about 50 O's. Yeah, winter is my favorite time of year if you didn't know. And I guess since we're talking about this, I can just be upfront. If we have some sort of location where there are like sakura trees and it's snowing and it's the winter time, that arc is automatically an S tier regardless of what happens. Though this is also where we are further shown the bizarre nature of the Grand Line. We get a lightning storm in the midst of a blizzard, and then the ship has somehow turned around. Then suddenly the snow clears up and a fog appears. The Grand Line really is a random place. I really enjoyed seeing this whole sequence. For a show about pirates, it's kind of surprising how little of good old ship maneuvering we've seen, so whenever we do get events such as these, they are a ton of fun. We then get a very brief time skip which sets up quite a bit of events to transpire next. While everyone was dealing with the crazy weather, Zoro was asleep. But now that the weather has cleared up, the roles are reversed, with everyone being exhausted and Zoro walking around asking what he missed. This was just a nice gag, but it would be much more important once they arrive at Whisky Peak, but of course more on that later. Just as they're about to make landfall, Mr. 9 and Miss Wednesday both escape, leaving the Straw Hats to figure out what to do on their own. This is also the first time where we see the whole crux of the log post. The crew has to stay here for a yet unknown amount of time for the log post to recalibrate and point them to the next island. And speaking more broadly, I have to give massive props to Oda for coming up with such a system. It fits in perfectly with both the randomness of the Grand Line and it forces the characters to have to explore these points of interest along the way. It's just a very well thought out plot device that I enjoyed seeing. As the Straw Hats sail into the island, we see something truly surprising. The people here are celebrating the arrival of pirates, greeting them on the Grand Line and calling them heroes of the sea. We are then introduced to this eccentric personality, the mayor of the town, Igarapois. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name, who demands that they throw a party in celebration of their arrival. And, I'll be honest, I was completely tricked by this. I thought it made sense in the story. We got the whole send-off through Logtown, and now the crew would be properly invited into the Grand Line. But, oh boy, how wrong I turned out to be. We see them being touted as legendary, with them being able to do literally every single thing better. Eat more, drink more, etc, etc. Though before we move on from this, seeing inflated Luffy almost killed me here already, so you can imagine what will happen next. And to avoid any more confusion through my horrible pronunciation, I will just call him Igarum from now on. And after the party is done, it is time for the twist. Igarum is actually Mr. 8. In other words, he knows both Mr. 9 and Miss Wednesday. We find out that the entire plan was to trap them here and get the 30 million bounty on Luffy. Literally every single person here is a bounty hunter. And this is also the first time where we get hints of this boss character. Then, twist number 2. It turns out Zoro had been awake the entire time and heard the entire conversation. This is what I was talking about before when he slept through the entire storm. The roles are very much flipped here. But we get this amazing shot of Zoro's sword glistening in the moonlight as we hear him for the first time. This was also another sequence where I thought that the animation had been changed, by the way. It looks like their budget was either expanded or they're just doing a lot more experimental shots. Either way, I'm completely on board. The cinematography here and later is absolutely awesome. But now we get to see Zoro take on the entire village of bounty hunters, and I'll be honest, Zoro is pretty much my favorite character at this point. It is switched between Luffy, Nami, Sanji, and Zoro when we got their respective focus episodes. Sorry Usopp, I still don't vibe with you. But at this point, I'm fairly confident in saying Zoro takes the cake. And as Zoro calls all of them out, we finally get the organization's name, as he knows them already. Baroque Works. Igarum cuts back and we get this super twisted scene that really surprised me. We slowly zoom in on the cacti, only to find out that each and every one of those little white dots is a grave. Holy, this was very much one of those instances where I was surprised at how dark this series got. Yeah, we've seen some pretty messed up stuff, but not mass graves, right? Though just as they begin their attack on Zoro, he downright vanishes. And it's time for the old theory brain once again, because my first thought was the cursed blade he acquired in Logtown. We've seen his skills in action before, right? But here, he almost seemed like the predator hunting down his prey. He disappears, then reappears, and absolutely starts to destroy them. And one more thing, this whole thing gave me those random JoJo stand vibes again. I mean, Igorum's sax is a gun. How much more weird can you get? The next 10 minutes or so is just Zoro going ham, and I absolutely loved it. It again reestablishes that idea that we talked about in Logtown. The East Blue massively changed Zoro as a character, and now we're seeing that, with him actually being terrifying here. We are then given some more lore. We find out that the lower the digit of the agents, the more powerful they are, so these single digit ones should be fairly dangerous. Though, as we see, they can't really put up a fight against Zoro. With that being said, it's once again a nice tease of what's to come next. With these being number 9 and number 8, we still have 7 agents to go through, which should, in theory, become progressively more and more powerful. More fighting later, we see the arrival of the Unluckies. We see that everyone is extremely afraid of them and pray that they don't tell the boss about this. And I'll have to budge in here for a second to talk about what I would love to see with the Unluckies. I've always enjoyed stories where there are a few mysterious characters that are deceptively powerful. These two absolutely fit that idea. It doesn't even matter if they are powerful themselves or their appearance signals something bad. They're kind of like the universal balancing force. Each time you see them, it's bad no matter what the situation is. And this is what I thought we'd get to see here as well, so I was very excited. Though before we could even see them do anything, even more characters make an appearance. Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine. Again, this very much went against my expectations as we jumped straight from 8 to 5, while I was expecting a more linear approach. And I'll give these two one thing. They are written perfectly to be extremely unlikable right from the get-go. I think the whole constant annoying laughter and general disrespect from Miss Valentine and the extreme overconfidence from Mr. 5 should make most viewers want to see them go down, which is a very good thing when speaking of villains. We've touched on this briefly before, but in general there are two major ways of writing villains. Charismatic ones, which you enjoy seeing but still want to go down, and the straight up baddies which are built with every bad trait imaginable, and personally, I feel like these two fit the latter category. We then get another plot twist. Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine are here with a different mission. Mr. 8 and Miss Wednesday are actually traitors who have infiltrated Baroque Works. Miss Wednesday is the princess of Alabasta Kingdom, and these two are here to eliminate them. So, the Zoro vs Baroque Works duel now turns into Alabasta members versus Baroque Works. And it seems like the princess, even with the help of Mr. 9, has absolutely no chance against Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine. Igaram begs Zoro to help them, promising an immense reward for returning the princess to Alabasta safely. And while Zoro refuses, Nami interrupts the conversation saying that they'll accept, asking for 1 billion berries in return. Once again, we see her being the deal broker here and outsmart everyone, saying that she knew all along they were being tricked, and this was just a ton of fun to see from Nami. Especially once she begins to get Zoro to play along, since he apparently owes her 300% for the swords he bought in Logtown. And it's at this point where the greatest event of this arc begins. Fat Luffy wakes up. I'll be honest, I laughed way harder than I should have each time he was on screen. Seeing him wobble around was just brilliant. We cut back to Vivi, who is trying to outrun Mr. 5 and Valentine, though she is far outmatched as we find out their respective abilities are blowing up any part of his body and changing body weight at will. In short, they are very strong. After we cut back to Nami and Igaram, we get another lore dump about Baroque Works. We find out that the boss is a mystery that no one knows the identity of, and the organization's mission is to create an ideal nation. I won't lie, this gave me JoJo Part 5 vibes again, especially with the whole mysterious boss wielding an ungodly amount of power thing. But jokes aside, I could tell straight away that this arc is setting up a much more major villain that would be an overarching narrative for the entire saga, or maybe even further, and thus we get these small tidbits of information that we can start piecing together. I just absolutely love this way of storytelling, as it always keeps you coming back for more. Switching back to Zoro and Vivi, Fat Luffy appears once again, who is mad that Zoro has attacked everyone in the town with seemingly no reason. I mean, yeah, this Zoro versus Luffy thing was completely random, but did I enjoy seeing it immensely? Absolutely. I was part laughing my head off and part amazed by the cinematography of the duel, because again, there are some amazing shots here. Furthermore, these sorts of series always bring up the question of who is more powerful, so seeing them actually take each other on was also interesting from that perspective, especially with both of them taking the whole thing very seriously. This whole duel also showed Baroque Works what they're messing with, as they pretty much pushed Mr. 5 and Miss Valentine to the sidelines here, almost not even considering them as worthwhile adversaries here. The whole duel is of course broken up by Nami, who knocks both of them out, which also gave me a very good chuckle. Once the bizarre duel of Zoro and Luffy is done, we get some more lore. Alabasta is in the middle of a civil war, which is why Vivi joined Baroque Works. They were the ones pulling the strings which threw the kingdom into the war. Also, once again, cool cinematography here. We get this shot slowly panning behind Zoro's head, which gives us quite an interesting perspective, the likes of which I don't think we've really seen before. We also find out more about the boss, Crocodile, who is a sea warlord. Though this whole crazy dramatic moment is juxtaposed by the fact that Vivi accidentally reveals his identity, which throws everyone into a meltdown of sorts. Again, my notes sum this up fairly well. What is this scene? This is also another instance of the Unluckies appearing and being that sort of foreshadowing element that hints at bad times to come. As is trend at this point, Luffy agrees to take on Crocodile, who has a small bounty of 80 million berries on his head. You know, 4 times Arlong's and almost 3 times Luffy's. No big deal, right? This was very much one of those times where my mind started racing with what this Crocodile guy was capable of, and who the other 7 warlords of the sea were. It's fairly obvious that we will see the Straw Hats take on all of them at some point, but right now, I was just left theorizing about what their abilities could be like. And you know what? This was the first time I got this bizarre idea of the Devil Fruit powers. So far, we've seen some pretty OP ones, right? Smoker, Mr. 5, Luffy, etc. But all of these are essentially dictated by the characters just getting lucky with what power of the fruit they have, right? You know what would truly dictate the power? The number of devil fruits the person has eaten. What if these warlords have multiple devil fruit powers? Yeah, needless to say, I was very hyped for the future of this saga. We also find out about the Eternal Pose, a log pose type thing which instead of pointing to the next island in the line, always points to a single location, Alabasta in this case. Igaram wears a disguise to look like Vivi and uses the Eternal Pose to appear as a distraction, while telling the Straw Hats to use the indirect route. Though just as he sets off, there's a moment of silence. And then the whole ship is just absolutely disintegrated. Again, this series is getting very, very dark. Though, before the nuke went off, what exactly were these hands? Also some sort of foreshadowing to the warlords, or maybe it was the power of Miss All Sunday, who we meet in just a few moments? But we did see that her power is disarming people, so maybe she too has multiple powers? No solid theories from me on this one, I really have no clue. Though we get this absolutely brilliant shot of Vivi standing on the coast as the whole ocean is just on fire. And thus, both Vivi and her awesome duck companion Karoo join the crew. As we get going, we get a few more tidbits of Baroque Works lore. We find out that there are about 2,000 people in the syndicate, and that there are numerous other towns similar to this one scattered throughout the Grand Line, hinting at the fact that we are essentially in enemy territory where every single person could be a part of the organization. Just as the craziness subsides, we are once again interrupted by a mysterious voice on the ship. A woman by the name of Miss All Sunday, the partner of Mr. Zero. In other words, the boss. And this is where things get very tricky. She offers to give them an eternal post to a different island near Alabasta, which the Straw Hats turn down, fearing that this may be a setup. Thing is, she warns them that the next island the log post route is taking them to is a very dangerous island by the name of Little Garden. Again, making you question whether she might have some ulterior motives and might just be on the side of the Straw Hats after all. After this very brief exchange, she just leaves on a huge turtle without doing anything to the Straw Hats. And just like Vivi, who was absolutely puzzled by her intentions, I felt exactly the same. Could she be some sort of neutral chaotic character like Ryuk, who is just on the sidelines and watching this purely for fun? Could she be trying to sabotage Baroque Works from the inside herself because she also has some other motivations? Assuming that Vivi was right about her killing Igaram, it leads me to believe that she is kind of a Joker character in this case. She fulfills her mission to cover her own skin, but after that, she just watches what will happen purely for entertainment. Either way, this was just once again a brilliant teaser that left my mind racing as to what exactly this would mean for later. We leave our characters with them on their way to Little Garden. And that's Whisky Peak. This was another really great one with plenty of setup for what's to come, as well as some good old action and comedy. Just like Reverse Mountain, Whisky Peak is also deceptively short at only 4 episodes, yet seemingly covering a lot of ground. Favorite moments in this one absolutely have to be the Zoro vs Baroque Works fights and then the Zoro vs Luffy duel. Both were brilliant. And again, the cinematography here is also great, with the previously mentioned perspective shots and then the very surprising nuke. With all that being said, I do think this is an A tier arc, but a lower A than Logtown, primarily because I felt Logtown had higher stakes in a lot of cases. Though Whisky Peak is still a great one, with the first new Straw Hat in a long while, as well as many hints of what's to come. Needless to say, these first few arcs have me very excited for the rest of Alabasta Saga. And that brings us to the end of our first journey into the Grand Line. And for the fun of it, let's do another test like I did in the previous video. If you made it this far, leave a comment, whatever it may be, and include the words Mr. 54. We'll see how many of you have made it until the very end. Other than that, if you enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you did all the YouTube things to let the algorithm know, and if you wish to support the channel even further, consider joining the Patreon where you can pledge as little as $1 per month and get access to all the benefits. All of my socials and links are as always in the description. Other than that, I want to say thank you very much for watching, I hope you have a great day, and hopefully, I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye!